The most terrifying alien mercenary. I beg you, never provoke humans again. Vrax had been doing this job for 30 cycles. 30 cycles of hunting, retrieving, eliminating. 30 cycles of walking into dangerous places and walking back out again with exactly what he was sent to find. He had a wall in his quarters covered in closed contracts. He had a reputation that made clients pay without arguing. He had scars that told better stories than most soldiers could manage with words. He was not afraid of anything. That was not arrogance. It was a fact, the same way the cold of deep space was a fact. Vrax of the Iron Caste had simply never encountered anything that gave his body the correct conditions to produce fear. He had come close to death 14 times and walked away from all 14 thinking about what he was going to eat when he got back to the ship. So when Delegate Sur contacted the Veth Syndicate with a Class 2 recovery contract, Vrax took it the way a grown man picks up a cup of water, without thinking, without preparing. It was that kind of job. The briefing was short. A human named Cole Mercer had gone quiet somewhere inside Veth-controlled space. His crew's cargo freighter had been impounded by Sur's office on a contraband charge. Mercer had separated from his crew during the seizure and disappeared into the sector's outer stations before Sur's people could grab him. Now, Sur wanted him found, brought in alive if practical, neutralized if not. The reason Sur was nervous had nothing to do with Cole Mercer being dangerous. And it had everything to do with Cole Mercer potentially reaching a United Earth diplomatic station and filing a grievance. Humans were territorial about their people in a way that made interstellar paperwork extremely unpleasant for delegates who had been cutting corners. Vrax read the contract on the shuttle. His second, a younger Veth officer named Crux, sat across from him going over the sector maps. Crux was good, careful, the kind of soldier who read files twice and asked one smart question at the end. He asked it now. "Have you worked a human contract before?" "No," Vrax said. "Should we upgrade the threat classification?" Vrax looked at the file on his screen. Cole Mercer, 38 years old, former United Earth Marine Corps, Tier 1 extraction work for 12 years before going private. The photo showed a lean man with a plain face and very calm eyes. Not large, not intimidating looking, the kind of man you would walk past on a station without a second glance. "No," Vrax said. He went back to reading. The medical section of the file was a little unusual. Vrax had looked at a lot of personnel files over the years, and the medical sections were usually boring. A list of vaccinations, a note about allergies, maybe a healed fracture from a training accident. Cole Mercer's medical record was not boring. It was long. Not because he was sick. Because he had been hurt. Consistently, for 20 years, in ways that should have ended his career several times over. And every single entry ended the same way. Healed. Returned to active duty. Cleared for full operational status. And there was a note from a United Earth surgeon near the bottom. Vrax ran it through the translation filter twice to make sure he was reading it correctly. Patient declined anesthesia for the third consecutive post-op procedure. Patient stated, quote, "It slows me down," end quote. Patient was advised. Patient acknowledged. Patient declined anyway. Vrax closed the file. He did not upgrade the threat classification. This was the first mistake, and it was the last mistake he made from a place of comfort. Every mistake after that was made from somewhere much worse. The sector they dropped into was industrial. Old refineries, storage hubs, a derelict processing station that had been out of operation for about 6 years. The station was big, built for a crew of 200, now holding nothing but broken equipment, bad lighting, and recycled air that tasted like rust. Cole Mercer's tracker signal was coming from inside. It had been stationary for 6 hours. Vrax looked at the signal on his board. Stationary was either hiding or surrender. He decided it was hiding. Humans were not known for standing their ground against professional recovery teams. They were fragile things, biologically speaking. 2 hearts, yes, but soft skin, no exoskeleton, no natural venom. The galaxy considered them a mid-tier species at best. Clever enough to build good ships, not built for real violence. Vrax took his team of 12 into the station. The first 3 things that happened were not on any plan he had made. First, a detonation at the entry corridor. Not a big one. Precise. And a focused blast from what his engineers would later identify as a repurposed fuel cell from the station's own storage. It took out 2 of his team's helmet sensors and filled the corridor with smoke thick enough to cut visibility to nothing for 40 seconds. 40 seconds is a long time when someone knows where you are and you do not know where they are. Second, a section of the east corridor collapsed. Not from the blast. From somewhere else. A structural failure in the floor supports that dropped 2 of his operatives into the maintenance level below. Vrax would study the collapse later and find that 3 support bolts had been removed with something thin and flat, a tool, or something used as one. Done quietly, ahead of time, in the dark. Third, Crux went down. Not from a weapon Vrax recognized. A bolt through the knee joint. And the gap between his lower and upper leg plating, exactly where the gap was. Fired from something that left a clean entry point and no exit burn. No energy signature, no sound. Vrax pulled Crux back and got a medic on him. He stood in the corridor and breathed through his nose slowly and looked at the smoke and the collapsed floor and the bolt in Crux's knee. He thought about the fuel cell, the loose bolts. The bolt itself, which one of his engineers pulled free and held up under a torch. It was made from a cargo tie-down rail, bent and sharpened at one end, fitted to a tube cut from a pressure vent line. A launcher powered by a compressed gas cartridge. Built from station parts, built from nothing, built in the dark, in 6 hours, alone. Vrax recalibrated. Not fear, not yet, but something adjacent to it. A professional recognition that the situation had a different shape than the briefing had suggested. He called up Mercer's file on his arm display and looked at the photo again. The plain face, the calm eyes. He thought about the medical file, the anesthesia note. He put his team into a proper search formation and swept inward. Cole Mercer's tracker signal was still stationary. It was sitting on a broken coolant pipe in an empty maintenance room. The room was empty. Mercer had been gone since before they landed. Maybe longer. The tracker had been left there like a held-out hand. A direction, not a location. A way of saying, I wanted you to come here. I wanted you looking this way. Vrax stood in that empty room and understood, for the first time in 30 cycles, that he had been managed. He was not the hunter in this station. And he was not sure, standing in the dark with the rust smell and the bad light and 12 operatives now down to 10, what exactly he was. He would spend a long time thinking about that question. He would never quite find an answer that sat comfortably. They hunted him for 4 hours. That was how long it took Vrax to accept that the word hunting was not quite right for what was happening inside that station. Hunting implied a predator and a prey. It implied someone running and someone chasing. It implied a clear direction to things. What was happening inside the station had no clear direction. It had traps, reroutes, misdirections, and a steadily shrinking team on Vrax's end. Cole Mercer did not fight them, not directly. He never stood in a corridor and exchanged fire. But he never made a move that looked like a move until after it had already worked. He dismantled them the way a careful engineer takes apart a machine, one component at a time, quietly, without wasting effort. The thermal vision went first. Not broken, exactly. Fooled. Someone had rerouted steam from a heating pipe through 3 rooms in sequence, filling them with warmth at body temperature. The operatives' visors lit up like a crowd was standing in every room. Vrax's team spent 40 minutes clearing rooms full of hot air. The wall scanners went second. Not broken there either, just made useless. Mercer had figured out which panels in the station's inner walls were made from a cheap ore compound that scattered the scanner signal. He moved through those walls. He stayed beside them. He became, on their screens, a ghost that appeared and vanished and reappeared somewhere that made no geometric sense. The third thing to go was the sealed atmosphere advantage. Vrax's team wore full suits, closed systems. In a station with bad air recycling, that was a significant edge. Nothing in the air could touch them. Mercer had no suit, no breathing gear, nothing between him and whatever the station was putting out. Except the station was not putting out anything. Mercer had found the air recycling controls in the first 2 hours and quietly adjusted them. By hour 3, the station air was cleaner than the recycled mix inside Vrax's own suits. Not a weapon, just a removal of an advantage. Done with the same patience as everything else. Methodical, almost impersonal. Vrax rotated his team into 2 sweeps and pushed deeper into the station. Yet the comms operator, a Veth officer named Drev, called out a thermal contact on the upper level. Stationary, solid. Not steam this time. A real reading, body mass, and heat output matching Mercer's file profile exactly. Vrax moved his team up. The contact was real. That was the surprise. Cole Mercer was standing in a pressurized cargo bay on the upper level, and he had clearly been there long enough to choose the ground. He had his back to a large storage container. In front of him there was open floor. Vrax's 12 operatives, now 10, spread across the entry points, weapons raised, angles covered. Mercer was bleeding. That was the first thing Vrax registered. A pulse round had caught him somewhere in the previous hour. Vrax had not even known the shot landed, and it had done real damage along the left side. And the cauterization was visible even at distance. The kind of wound that most species sat down from. The kind that produced shock, system shutdown, the body's automatic request to stop and deal with the injury before anything else happened. Mercer was not sitting down. He was standing with one hand braced against the storage container and the other hand loose at his side, and he was looking at the 10 armed operatives in his cargo bay with an expression that Vrax had absolutely no name for. It was not defiance. Vrax knew what defiance looked like on a cornered target. Defiance was wide eyes and a raised chin and a body that was scared and trying not to show it. This was not that. It was not surrender either. Surrender had a particular shape, a loosening, a kind of letting go that showed in the shoulders and the face. And this was neither of those things. Vrax would spend a long time later trying to find the right word for it. The closest he came, in his own language, was something that translated roughly as a person who has already finished deciding. All the calculation was done. The math had been completed somewhere private and the result had been accepted. Whatever came next was just the execution of a plan that was already made. Mercer looked at all 10 of them. Then he looked directly at Vrax. He smiled. Vrax had been in enough dangerous rooms to know the different kinds of smiles that showed up in them. The desperate smile, the reckless smile, the smile of someone who had decided to go out making noise. This smile was none of those. It was small, private, almost. The kind of smile that belonged to a specific thought, and not to the room or the people in it. As if Mercer had just confirmed something he had already suspected, and found that he was right. Vrax said, "It is finished. Come down." Mercer looked at the wound on his side. Then he looked at the container behind him. Then he looked back at Vrax. He went sideways. Not forward, not back. Sideways, through a wall panel that he had pre-loosened at some point. It came away with one controlled push. And he was gone into the maintenance space behind it before any of Vrax's team had finished processing the movement. Vrax sent 4 operatives after him. They found the panel. They found the maintenance corridor. They found the place, 30 meters in, where Mercer had moved through a second loosened panel into a different section of the station. They did not find Mercer. Vrax stood in the cargo bay and looked at the panel and breathed through his nose. He called in the team positions. 7 of them were in the upper level. 3 were covering the lower exits. The exits were all sealed. The shuttle dock was guarded. There was no way out of the station that was not covered by at least 2 of his people. Mercer could not escape, and yet Vrax did not feel, standing there with his numbers and his exit coverage and his sealed station, like a man who had something trapped. He felt like a man who had walked into the center of something and was only now starting to understand the shape of it from the inside. He pulled up the sector map on his display and studied the station layout. The maintenance corridors ran through most of the structure like veins. Mercer had been inside them, had been learning them. It had been, for the last 4 hours, not running through the station, but reading it. Understanding which parts were strong and which parts would give, which routes were fast and which ones looped back, where the air went and where the power ran, and what could be moved and what could be made into something else. Vrax thought about that. He thought about the fuel cell detonation, the collapsed corridor, the steam in the walls, the bolt through Crux's knee joint. He thought about 10 operatives with the best equipment the syndicate issued, working for 4 hours, and what they had to show for it. He thought about the anesthesia note in the medical file. He ordered his team to hold positions and wait. 3 minutes later, from somewhere deep inside the maintenance system, he heard a sound he had not expected. A steady, rhythmic sound. The metal. On metal. Careful. Slow. Like someone building something in the dark. Vrax listened to it for a long moment. He was not afraid, but for the first time in 30 cycles, he genuinely did not know what was coming next. That, he would reflect later, was probably the moment he should have left. The comms channel opened at hour 5. Vrax's wrist unit lit up with an incoming signal, unencrypted station frequency. He accepted it without moving from his position near the upper-level corridor. His team held their spots. The station was still. The only sound was the recycled air moving through the vents and the distant hum of the station's emergency power running on its last reserve. The voice on the channel was calm, male, slightly rough at the edges. The way voices get when a person has been breathing recycled station air for too long and bleeding quietly for the last 2 hours. "You're Vrax," the voice said, not a question. "Yes," Vrax said. "Syndicate. Ironcast." "Yes." A short pause. "Then you're the one I talked to." Vrax said nothing. He waited. In his experience, the person with something to say would say it faster if you gave them the silence to fill. Cole Mercer said, "Your shuttle is in Dock 3. Fuel cell access panel is on the port side. Maintenance code is standard syndicate issue. Your people didn't change it when they landed. I've had about 4 hours near that dock." Vrax went still. "I didn't touch it," Mercer said. "I want you to know that. I was there. I had time. I didn't touch it." "What do you want?" Vrax said. "My crew. Laura Hess, Owen Drake, Nina Vasquez. They're in Sewer's detention facility on the main station. I want them released, unharmed, transported to neutral docking and cleared to leave." Vrax ran the logic of this. Mercer had a clear tactical advantage. He had proven over the last 5 hours that he could damage Vrax's team at will without taking a direct confrontation. He had been close enough to the shuttle to destroy it, which would have stranded the entire retrieval team in the sector without extraction. He had not done it. He was trading that advantage for 3 other people. Vrax processed this for longer than he normally needed to process things. "In exchange," Vrax said, "I stand down. You take me in. No more of your people get hurt." It was a clean offer. Simple terms. And the problem was not the terms. The problem was the logic behind them. The Vrax had retrieved targets across 30 cycles. He had retrieved soldiers, criminals, defectors, diplomats, black market operators, and one individual who turned out to be 3 separate individuals working in rotation. He knew how people in bad situations thought. He knew the calculations they ran. He knew what people traded and what they held on to, and how they made decisions when the walls were closing in. No one in a bad situation traded their escape for someone else. It was not the way the math worked. The math was simple. Your survival first, then see what you can do for others once you are safe. Every species Vrax had ever encountered ran this calculation the same way. It was not selfishness, it was biology. Cole Mercer had a working exit and was offering to give it up for 3 people who were not even in the same building. Then Vrax calmed Delegate Sewer. The conversation was short and unpleasant. Sewer was not interested in releasing the crew. The crew were his leverage, his insurance against the diplomatic grievance, his way of making sure the situation ended on his terms. Sewer said Mercer was bluffing. Sewer said no professional with real options would give them up for a handful of freight workers. Sewer said to bring Mercer in and not to overcomplicate things. Vrax held the channel open to Mercer without saying anything for a moment. Then he said, "The delegate declines." 3 seconds of silence on the other end. Vrax counted them. Mercer said, "Okay." 1 word, flat, clear, with nothing extra attached to it. The kind of okay that was not disappointment or anger or desperation. It was the sound of a door closing, a decision confirmed. Next step engaged. The channel went quiet. Vrax ordered full defensive positions across all access points. He had a feeling, sudden and unpleasant, that he had just made a mistake by proxy, that the mistake had actually been Sewer's, but that Vrax's team was going to be the one standing in the way of whatever happened next. What happened next did not happen in the derelict station. It happened in Sewer's detention facility, 11 minutes away by shuttle, where 3 people had been sitting in a holding cell for the better part of 4 days. Laura Hess had been sitting with her back against the wall and her eyes on the guard rotation since the first day. She had counted shifts, timed the gaps, noted which guards talked to each other and which ones did not, and which doors were on manual locks and which ones ran on the facility's central power grid. Owen Drake had spent 2 days quietly working on the cell door's locking bolt. Not the mechanism, that was sealed. The bolt housing itself, which was fastened to the wall with 4 anchor screws. Owen had one tool, the heel reinforcement from his left boot, pride-free with patience and a specific kind of cheerful stubbornness that was entirely his own. The screws were almost out, had been almost out for 16 hours. Owen was waiting for a signal. Nina Vasquez had done 2 things. She had checked herself and the other 2 for injuries every day with the kind of thoroughness that made it clear she was not doing it to be helpful, but because data mattered, and she wanted to know exactly what condition they were all in when the time came to move. But she had also, very quietly, been watching the ventilation layout of the facility and working out which shafts connected to which sections. The signal was not dramatic. It was not a broadcast or a flare or a loud noise. It was the facility's power grid dropping for 40 seconds. Cole Mercer had told them, before the freighter was seized, that if things went wrong, the power was the signal. He had said it the way he said most things, short, plain, with no decoration. If the power drops and comes back, you move. You do not wait to see if it was an accident. The power dropped. Owen's boot heel finished the last screw. The bolt housing came free of the wall. Laura was at the door before it fully swung open. Nina was already counting the steps to the ventilation access in the east corridor. Now, by the time the facility's backup power restored the lights and the guards ran their check, the cell was empty, and 3 humans were moving through a maintenance shaft toward the shuttle bay with the quiet efficiency of people who had been planning this for 4 days and were not particularly surprised to be doing it. Back in the derelict station, Vrax heard none of this. He heard only the station settling, the ventilation running, and somewhere in the walls, Cole Mercer moving. He did not know yet what was happening 11 minutes away. He did not know that Mercer had planned for both outcomes when he made the call. The offer was real, but the backup was already running. Had been running since the crew was taken. Mercer had not been waiting to be rescued. And he had been waiting for the right moment to let his crew rescue themselves. Vrax would understand this later, sitting in the deposition room, and the tribunal would watch him go quiet in the middle of his own sentence. They would ask him to continue. He would sit with his hands flat on the table for a long moment before he found the words again. He would say, "I thought I was dealing with a man trying to survive. I was dealing with a man who had already decided how it ended and was simply moving the pieces into position." He would pause again. "The difference," he said, "is significant. Vrax found him at the shuttle dock corridor. Not because Mercer made a mistake, not because the team's scanners finally caught a clean reading. Vrax found him because Mercer let himself be found. The crew's escape route ran through Dock 2. Vrax's shuttle was in Dock 3, with a guard team covering the connector corridor between them. Cole Mercer needed that corridor clear for long enough to get 3 people across it and into a ship, so he walked out in front of the guard team himself. One man, open corridor, no cover, no approach angle, no tactical setup. Just Cole Mercer standing there, bleeding from the side, holding a length of metal pipe, looking at 4 armed Veth operatives like he had somewhere to be, and they were the inconvenience standing between him and it. The guards called Vrax immediately. Vrax ran. He arrived to find his 4 operatives in a situation that required explanation. 2 were down, not dead, but down, which with Veth physiology meant something significant had hit them in a joint or sensor cluster. 1 had a broken communications unit, and the 4th was standing in a defensive stance at the far end of the corridor, looking at Mercer the way an animal looks at something it has never seen before and cannot categorize. Mercer was standing. He had taken hits. Vrax could see them. 3 pulse contacts. Direct ones, not grazes, in the torso and left arm. The kind that cooked tissue. The kind that dumped enough electromagnetic shock into a body to stop secondary cardiac functions in most species. In humans, it caused damage, genuine damage, and the body's response to it was pain and shutdown. Mercer's response was to be standing in a corridor holding a pipe, keeping the route clear, watching Vrax arrive. Vrax came with 6 operatives. He had the angles. He had the numbers. He had weapons drawn, and the corridor was a box, and there was no room to disappear into this time. No maintenance panel, no pre-loosened wall section. Mercer looked at all 6 of them. Then he looked over his shoulder at the dock 2 access behind him. A quick look. A checking look. The look of a man confirming that the people he was holding the road for had made it through. Then he looked back at Vrax. He lowered the pipe, not dropped it. Not thrown it down in surrender. Just let it hang at his side, the way you lower something when you no longer need it for what you were using it for. Vrax said, "Did they get out?" He did not mean to ask it. The question came out of whatever part of a soldier's mind notices the shape of a situation and names it before the rest of the brain has approved the observation. He had seen what Mercer was doing with that corridor. He had understood it halfway through the run from the upper level. The Mercer said, "Are you going to tell me?" Vrax checked his comms. The Dock 2 guard position was not responding. He pulled the station external feed. A ship was clearing the dock. A battered cargo runner listing slightly on the starboard side from what looked like a docking bracket that had not released cleanly, accelerating away from the station on a heading that pointed toward neutral space. Vrax confirmed it. Mercer exhaled. It was not a dramatic thing. It was small and quiet and went out of him like the last tension leaving a cable when the load is finally set down. His shoulders came down slightly. The tightness went out of the way he was holding his jaw. He said, "Okay, now it's over." He sat down on the floor of the corridor, not collapsed, chose to sit, but like a man who had been standing for a very long time and had just been given permission to stop. Vrax had his team take him into custody. This was straightforward. Mercer offered no resistance. He let them apply the restraints without moving, answered the identification questions in the processing protocol with the same calm, flat voice he had used on the comms channel, and asked once if he could keep his thermos. It was clipped to his belt, dented, scratched, absolutely not a weapon. Vrax's team scanned it. Water. Slightly bitter water that smelled like it had been brewed from something that was not technically coffee, but was performing the function of coffee. Vrax said he could keep it, The field medic came in to do the standard injury assessment before transport. This was procedure. Vrax stood back and let the medic work. He watched the medic slow down. Not hesitate, slow down. The way a person reading a document slows down when the words stop making the kind of sense they were expecting. The medic was not cataloging new injuries. The new injuries were severe and would have had Vrax's own species off their feet. But the new injuries were almost beside the point because underneath them was everything else. The healed damage. The map of Cole Mercer's last 20 years laid out in scar tissue, reset bones, places where the body had been forced to patch itself back together over and over and had done it imperfectly but completely and kept going. The medic looked up at Vrax. "This is normal for them," the medic said. The medic said it neutrally. "Clinically. The way you state a measurement. You're the way you say the temperature in a room or the distance between 2 points as a fact that required no judgment attached to it." Vrax looked at Cole Mercer sitting on the floor of the corridor, drinking from his dented thermos with 3 pulse-burn wounds and a body that had been through things that would have retired most soldiers permanently, and he thought about that sentence. Normal. He thought about the fuel cell detonation, the loose bolts, the steam in the walls, the 4-day plan his crew had been running while sitting in a detention cell. The corridor held open with a human body, so 3 other people could walk through it. He thought about 30 cycles of contracts and a wall full of closed files and 14 near deaths that he had walked away from without a second thought. He thought about the medical note, yet the anesthesia, the 3rd time. He thought, what does a species have to go through for how long to produce this? He did not say any of this. He told his team to prepare for transport and calmed Delegate Seward to confirm the retrieval was complete. Seward was pleased. Seward said well done and asked for the delivery timeline and mentioned in passing that the crew's escape was inconvenient but manageable and he would have people on it. Vrax said he understood. He looked at Mercer one more time before they moved to the shuttle. Mercer was not looking at him. He was looking at the wall of the corridor with his thermos in his hands, and his face had the particular quality of a person who is not really here but somewhere else, somewhere private, already past this moment and thinking about the next one. Vrax thought, this is not over. And he did not know then the specific shape of what was not over. He did not know about the plan already forming somewhere beyond the sector, or the ship that had just cleared Dock 2, or the 3 people on it who had been sitting in a cell for 4 days, not waiting to be saved, but waiting to do their part. He knew it, the way you know a storm from the pressure in the air before the clouds arrive. Something was not finished. He told his team to move out and said nothing else for the duration of the shuttle ride. The handoff happened at a diplomatic transfer point in the neutral belt between Veth space and the outer trading lanes. It was a clean facility. White walls, controlled lighting, the kind of place built specifically for transactions that needed to look official. Delegate Seward arrived with 4 of his staff and a transport team. He was in good clothes, the formal kind, the kind people wear when they want the record to show they were calm and in control throughout proceedings. Vrax delivered Cole Mercer at the agreed time. Mercer walked in under his own power. The restraints were standard issue. The medic had patched the pulse wounds well enough for transit, and Mercer's face showed nothing about what any of that had cost him. He walked the way he had sat in the corridor, deliberately, without performance, like a man in no hurry because hurry was no longer relevant. Seward looked at him with the particular satisfaction of someone who has gotten what they wanted and is enjoying the moment. Mercer did not look at Seward. He looked at the room. Vrax noticed this because Vrax was watching. That he had been watching Mercer the whole transit, and he had not stopped watching him now. He had spent too many hours inside that station to turn the attention off, just because the job was technically closed. Mercer was not looking at Seward. He was not looking at the transfer team or the formal walls or the diplomatic seals on the entry panels. He was looking at the room's layout, the exits, the guard positions, the place where the ventilation access sat behind a decorative panel on the east wall, the power relay junction visible through the gap above the main door. He was reading it. He was doing in this clean white diplomatic room exactly what he had done in the derelict station, learning the shape of the place, filing away what could be moved, what could fail, what connected to what. Vrax thought, he has already started, and he said nothing. The contract was complete. Cole Mercer was delivered alive and unharmed into Sewer's custody. Vrax signed the closed documentation on his arm unit and handed the stylus back to Sewer's administrator, and that was that. 30 cycles of professional conduct. The job was done. He walked back to his shuttle. He sat down in the pilot's seat and looked at the forward screen for a long time without engaging the departure sequence. Crux, who had been cleared for light duty, was in the co-seat with his knee wrapped and his movement careful. He looked at Vrax. He did not ask what was wrong because the question would have required Vrax to have an answer, and neither of them was sure one existed. Vrax filed the debrief, set the return course, and they left the neutral belt behind. He upgraded the threat classification on all human contracts the following evening. He wrote the recommendation himself, 6 pages long, which was 5.5 pages longer than any recommendation he had previously submitted to the Syndicate's assessment division. He used specific language. He cited specific incidents. He included at the end a personal note that he marked clearly as personal and not operational, which he had also never done before. The note said, "There is something in the way they are built, not just physically, but in how they think, that we do not have good language for. They do not appear to calculate risk the way other species do. They appear to calculate acceptable loss, which is different, and the things they are willing to accept as loss include themselves. This is not courage. The courage is choosing to do the dangerous thing despite the fear." What I observed did not appear to involve that particular negotiation. I do not know what it involves. I recommend that the Syndicate's academic wing begin a formal study before any further human contracts are accepted. The Syndicate's academic wing forwarded it to 3 researchers and filed the original. 2 weeks later, a battered cargo runner with a listing starboard side and a docking bracket that had never fully reseated itself crossed into the outer communication lanes and sent a burst transmission to the nearest United Earth diplomatic station. The transmission was a formal grievance: cargo seizure, unlawful detention, denial of consular access, falsification of contraband records. 4 counts. Filed under the full protections of the United Earth Commercial Transit Accord, which Delegate Sewer's sector office had technically been a signatory to for 11 years, without any particular expectation that anyone would use it. Laura Hess had written the filing. She had been composing it in her head for 4 days in the detention cell, which had given her a great deal of time to get the language exactly right. Nina Vasquez had countersigned as a witness to the detention conditions. Her account was precise and detailed and included measurements of the cell dimensions and a clinical summary of the medical neglect that she delivered without emotional decoration, which made it significantly more devastating than if she had been angry about it. Owen Drake had gotten the ship running well enough to make the crossing, which was its own kind of filing. The diplomatic response took 6 days. Sewer's office received a formal communication from the United Earth Diplomatic Corps that was polite in the specific way that very serious things are polite, where the politeness is not friendliness, but precision. It outlined the evidence. It outlined the applicable law. It outlined the expected remedies. The impounded freighter was released within 48 hours, returned with a formal apology from the Veth Syndicate's administrative division and a reimbursement for the impound period. Sewer's office issued a statement. Cole Mercer was quietly released 3 days after that, through a process that no one described out loud as embarrassing, but that clearly was. Vrax heard about all of this secondhand. He was on another contract by then, and a straightforward retrieval in the outer sectors that had nothing to do with humans and proceeded exactly as planned and gave him no new material for reports or recommendations or personal notes filed under his own name. He sat in the deposition room 6 months later and told the tribunal all of it, start to finish. He was precise, as he always was. He did not dramatize. He did not minimize. He gave them the sequence of events and the observations and the conclusions in the order they had occurred. At the end, the tribunal chair slid a contract file across the table. High-value retrieval, human adjacent space, standard syndicate terms. The client was reputable. The target profile was, on paper, a Class 2. Vrax looked at the file. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about the derelict station and the thermos and the corridor held open with a body that should have been down 3 times over by then. He thought about the medic's voice saying this is normal for them, with no expression attached to it. He thought about Mercer in the white diplomatic room reading the exits while standing in restraints. He thought about the night since then where the station sounds came back, the metal on metal in the dark, the sound of something building. He thought about the wall in his quarters and the files on it, 30 cycles of them, and the fact that he had slept fine under all of them without exception, until now. When I was young, Vrax said, I fought in the Keth expulsion. 7 cycles, I was captured twice. I have scars in places that have no names in your medical charts. He paused. I have done every terrible thing this work requires and slept fine. He stood up. He pushed the contract file back across the table. I no longer sleep fine. He looked at the tribunal chair, then at the file, then back. I beg you, he said, whatever it earns, whatever the client offers. Never put my name on a human contract again. He left the room. The door closed behind him. The tribunal sat in silence for a moment. Then the chair picked up the file. One of the other members asked if the recommendation should be circulated to the full syndicate roster. The chair thought about this. Yes, she said. She thought about it a little longer. Flag it urgent. Outside in the corridor, Vrax walked toward the exit with his hands at his sides and his eyes forward, the way he had walked out of every room for 30 cycles, and he did not look back. Some doors, once you understood what was on the other side of them, were better left closed.